The transport ship landed with a heavy thud that made Junho's stomach drop. He pressed his face against the small window and saw the massive structure waiting below. It looked like someone had carved a mountain from pure crystal and turned it into a building. Lights danced inside it like trapped stars. "Everyone out," the automated voice announced in flat English. "Proceed to the main arena." Junho grabbed his small bag and followed the crowd. There were thousands of humans here, all looking just as confused as he felt. Some wore fancy suits like they were important. Others wore military uniforms. Junho looked down at his own clothes, just the standard blue jumpsuit of a merchant fleet engineer. Nothing special at all. A woman next to him was crying quietly. A man in front kept muttering prayers under his breath. Nobody knew why they were here. The message had been simple. You have been selected to represent humanity. Attendance is mandatory. That was 3 days ago. Since then, just travel and waiting and more travel. The arena was even bigger inside than it looked from outside. The floor was smooth like glass, but it didn't feel slippery under Junho's boots. Seats rose up on all sides, and they were already filled with aliens. So many different types that Junho's head hurt trying to look at them all. Some had fur, some had scales, some looked like they were made of living metal. Some floated in the air without any visible support. "Stay in your designated areas," another voice commanded. This one sounded organic, but Junho couldn't tell what species it belonged to. The selection will begin shortly. Junho found himself in Section 47, standing between a nervous-looking teenager and an older man with military posture. The teenager couldn't stop fidgeting. The old soldier just stared straight ahead like he was on parade. "Do you know what this is about?" Junho asked the soldier. The man didn't even blink. "Above my pay grade, son." "Way above." A sound filled the arena then. It wasn't loud, but it made everyone stop talking immediately. It felt like the air itself was humming. The aliens in the seats all stood up at once, which created a wave of movement that made Junho dizzy to watch. Something was coming. The doors at the far end of the arena opened. These weren't normal doors. They were circular and made of that same crystal material, and they spiraled open like a flower blooming. Light poured through so bright that Junho had to squint. She walked through the light. Junho had seen aliens before during his years on cargo ships. He'd gotten used to talking with beings that had 6 arms or no mouth or eyes on stalks. But this was different. This alien made every human in the arena hold their breath without meaning to. She was tall, maybe 8 feet, with skin that looked like polished silver blue metal, but moved like cloth. Her face was almost human-shaped, but too perfect, like a statue of what humans wished they looked like. Her eyes were the color of deep space, black with tiny points of light that moved like real stars. She wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid light, constantly flowing and changing color. Behind her walked 12 more aliens of the same species, but none of them had that same presence. They were like candles next to a sun. "The Vryn Empress," someone whispered. The word spread through the humans like wind through grass. That's Empress Thala herself. Junho had heard of the Vryn, everyone had. They were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. They could read minds. They lived for hundreds of years. Their empire controlled thousands of worlds. When the Vryn spoke, other species listened. Thala walked slowly across the arena floor. Her feet made no sound. The aliens in the seats bowed as she passed, but she didn't look at any of them. Her star-filled eyes swept across the humans instead. Junho felt her gaze pass over his section and his whole body went cold. It was like being naked in a snowstorm. Like every thought in his head was suddenly visible. He wanted to hide, but his legs wouldn't move. She kept walking, studying each group of humans. Sometimes she paused for a moment, tilted her head slightly, then moved on. Other aliens had started gathering at the edges of the arena now. Important-looking beings in robes and armor. Some of them were clearly waiting for their turn to pick humans too. "This is a selection ceremony." A hologram suddenly appeared in the air above them, translating into dozens of languages at once. "Multiple species have requested human consultants. This is a great honor for your world. Those chosen will serve as advisors and cultural representatives. You will be treated well and compensated according to coalition standards." The teenager next to Junho started breathing very fast. The old soldier's jaw got tight. Junho's own heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Thala was getting closer to their section now. She moved like water, smooth and unstoppable. When she was about 20 feet away, she stopped walking. Her eyes fixed on something. On someone. On Junho, time seemed to freeze. The Empress raised one hand, long fingers that moved with impossible grace, and pointed directly at him. Not near him. Not sort of in his direction. Exactly at him. Her voice filled the entire arena when she spoke. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, like music and thunder mixed together, and she spoke in perfect Korean. That one belongs to me. The words hit Junho like a physical force. The other aliens who had been moving forward all stopped instantly. Some of them actually took steps backward. The 12 Vrin behind Thala showed no expression, but they moved into a protective formation around where she was pointing. Junho couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't process what just happened. Everyone was staring at him. Every human. Every alien. Thousands upon thousands of eyes. The old soldier next to him slowly turned his head. "Son," he said quietly, "I don't know if you're the luckiest man alive or the most cursed." Two of Thala's attendants glided forward. They stopped in front of Junho and bowed slightly. "You will come with us," one said in that same musical voice. "The Empress has claimed you. This is a great honor." Junho's legs finally remembered how to move. They were shaking. Everything was shaking. He stepped forward because there was nothing else to do. As he walked across the crystal floor toward the Empress, he could feel every eye watching him. Thala didn't move. She just watched him approach with those impossible eyes. When he was close enough, she spoke again, quieter this time, but still in Korean. "Do not be afraid, Park Junho. I have chosen you for a reason." She knew his name. She knew his language, and somehow in a way he couldn't explain, Junho knew that his life had just changed forever. There was no going back to the cargo ships. No going back to fixing engines and eating alone in the mess hall. Everything he knew was already in the past. The Empress turned and began walking toward the crystal doors. Her attendants moved to flank Junho, gently guiding him to follow. As they left the arena, Junho looked back once. The other humans still stood frozen in their sections. Some looked envious. Some looked relieved. Some just looked terrified for him. The doors spiraled shut behind them and the arena disappeared from view. The ship was like nothing Junho had ever seen, and he'd spent 5 years working on cargo vessels. This wasn't a ship. It was a small city that happened to fly through space. The ceilings were so high he couldn't see them clearly. The walls seemed to be made of the same flowing material as the Empress's robes, constantly shifting with colors that didn't have names in any human language. Junho had been given quarters that were bigger than his entire apartment back on Earth. The bed was too large. The bathroom had fixtures he didn't know how to use. There was a window that showed the stars streaming past, but they moved in ways that made his head hurt if he looked too long. He was sitting on the edge of the too large bed when someone knocked on his door. At least he thought it was a knock. It sounded more like someone playing a single note on a glass instrument. "Come in," he said, not sure if that was right. The door dissolved like mist and a human woman walked in. She looked to be in her 30s, wearing clothes that were a mix of human and alien styles. Her black hair was cut short and practical. She carried a tablet and had the look of someone who was always busy. "Park Junho," she said in Korean, though her accent was from Seoul, not Busan like his. "I'm Hyejin. I've been working with the Vrin for 2 years as a xenolinguist. I'm here to help you adjust." Junho stood up quickly. "Can you tell me what's happening? Why did she choose me? I'm just an engineer. I fix cooling systems and calibrate engines. I'm nobody." Hyejin sat down in one of the chairs that seemed to grow out of the floor. "That's what everyone says at first. But the Empress doesn't choose randomly. The Vrin are telepathic, did you know that? When she looked at you, she read your mind. Every thought, every memory, everything you are, and she saw something she wanted. The idea made Junho feel sick. She read my mind? All of it? All of it, Hyejin confirmed. She didn't look sympathetic. Get used to it. The Vrin can't help it any more than you can help seeing with your eyes. It's just how they experience the world. But don't worry, most of them have learned not to comment on what they see. It would be like humans constantly announcing everything we see. It would be rude and exhausting." Junho sat back down. His legs felt weak. "Where are we going?" "The Vrin homeworld. Empress Thala wants you at her court." Hyejin leaned forward. "Listen carefully because this is important. You need to understand what belongs to me means in Vrin culture. It's not ownership like humans think of it. It's more like a bond, a responsibility that goes both ways. She's claimed you. which means she's responsible for you. She has to protect you, guide you, speak for you. But it also means you belong to her court, her service, her circle of trust. I didn't agree to any of this, Junho said quietly. I know, but refusing would be an insult that would damage Earth's relationship with the Vryn Empire. And trust me, you don't want that. The Vryn control a quarter of the known galaxy. They're the reason humanity even has a seat at the diplomatic table. Yejin's voice softened a little. Look, I know this is scary. I was terrified when I first came here. But the Vryn aren't cruel. They're just different, very different. Over the next few days, Yejin taught Junho the basics. How to bow correctly when meeting Vryn nobles. Which foods were safe for humans to eat in the ship's dining halls. How to tell the difference between Vryn social classes by the patterns in their skin. How to request things from the ship's automated systems using simple mental commands. That last part was the hardest. The ship responded to thoughts, not words. Junho had to learn to think clearly and specifically about what he wanted. When he thought vaguely about being hungry, every food preparation station on his floor activated at once. It took him 3 hours to turn them all off again. He met other members of the Empress's court during meals. Most were Vryn, but there were a few other species too. They were polite but distant. They watched him with curiosity, the way humans might watch an interesting insect. One Vryn noble named Velesh actually spoke to him directly. Velesh's skin was darker blue than the Empress's, almost purple with silver patterns that looked like circuit boards. Tell me, human, Velesh said in English that sounded like music. Why do you think the Empress chose you? Junho had been asking himself that same question. I don't know. Honesty. How refreshing. Velesh's eyes, which looked more silver than the Empress's starry ones, studied him carefully. Most species would have made up a flattering reason. Humans are interesting, so short-lived yet so persistent, like insects that refuse to acknowledge they're insects. Junho wasn't sure if that was an insult or a compliment. He decided to take it as a compliment. On the 5th day, a summons came. The Empress wanted to see him in her private chambers. Yejin helped him dress in formal clothes that felt too fancy and showed him the way through the ship's endless corridors. The Empress's chambers were at the very center of the ship. The walls here were transparent, showing the strange stretched starlight of faster-than-light travel. Thala stood looking out at it, her back to the door. Park Junho, she said without turning around. Come closer. He walked forward on shaking legs. When he was about 10 feet away, she finally turned to face him. This close, her presence was even more overwhelming. It was like standing next to a waterfall or a cliff edge, something that made you very aware of how small you were. You're afraid of me, she observed. It wasn't a question, yes, Junho admitted. Lying to a telepath seemed pointless. Good. Fear is honest. Fear means you understand that this situation is larger than you. She moved closer, and Junho had to force himself not to step back. Do you know what I saw in your mind when I chose you, Park Junho? No, Empress. Hope. The word hung in the air between them. Not ambition. Not brilliance. Not even courage, though you have some of that. Just hope. Stubborn, unreasonable, illogical hope. You've lived a small life by most measures. You fix machines. You eat alone. You have no family, few friends. Your species is barely noticed in the wider galaxy. You have every reason to despair. And yet when I touched your mind, I found hope burning like a small sun. Junho didn't know what to say to that. My people have lost that, Thala continued. We live for centuries. We have power, knowledge, technology beyond what your species dreams of. But we've forgotten how to hope for better things. We maintain. We preserve. We do not dare. Her starry eyes fixed on him. I chose you because I want to remember what hope feels like. And because humanity is about to face a test and I want to understand what drives your species. Why you keep trying when logic says you should give up? What test? Junho asked. The Galactic Coalition is debating whether to accept humanity as full members or keep you isolated as a probationary species. The decision will affect billions of humans for generations. And you, Park Junho, are going to help me argue for your species' acceptance. The weight of those words nearly knocked Junho over. Me? I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a speaker. I can't. You can, Thala interrupted, because you're human. And that's exactly what the Coalition needs to see. She turned back to the window. We'll arrive at my homeworld tomorrow. Rest. Learn what you can from Yejin. And prepare yourself, Park Junho. Your small life is over. What comes next will be much larger and much more dangerous. Junho was dismissed. He walked back to his quarters in a daze. When he got there, he stood at his own window and looked out at the impossible stars. His reflection looked back at him. A very ordinary man in fancy clothes, completely out of his depth. But somewhere deep inside, in a place he usually ignored, something flickered. Maybe it was that hope the Empress had seen. Maybe it was just stubbornness. But Junho thought about his parents who had died in the food shortages when he was young. About the teachers who had given him a chance when others wouldn't. About the cargo ship captain who had trained him when he knew nothing. People had believed in him before. Maybe he could do this too. Maybe. The Vryn homeworld was called Valara, and it looked like someone had built a planet specifically to be beautiful. Crystal spires rose from forests that glowed with bioluminescent plants. Cities floated on platforms of solid light. The sky was purple during the day and showed 3 moons at night, each a different color. Junho tried not to stare like a tourist, but it was impossible. Everything was too perfect, too clean, too carefully designed. There was no trash, no broken buildings, no signs of poverty or struggle. It was paradise, but it also felt somehow empty. The Empress's palace was carved into a mountain of living crystal. Hyejin explained that the crystal had been grown over thousands of years, shaped by Vryn telepathy into its current form. It was both a building and a work of art, and a symbol of everything the Vryn had achieved. Junho was given new quarters even larger than his rooms on the ship. He had 3 personal attendants who appeared whenever he needed anything, often before he even asked. It was comfortable and luxurious and made him incredibly uncomfortable. On his second day on Valara, Hyejin brought him to an observation room. A holographic display filled one wall, showing what looked like a courtroom or council chamber. Hundreds of different aliens sat in a circular arrangement around a central platform. This is the Galactic Coalition Assembly, Hyejin explained. Representatives from over 300 species. They make laws, settle disputes, manage trade agreements, and decide which new species get accepted as members. And they're deciding about humanity? Junho asked. Yes, the debate has been going on for months. Earth applied for full membership 2 years ago. Since then, it's been nothing but arguments and delays. She pointed at different sections of the assembly. Those are the Kresh, the big ones with the red armor. They're arguing that humans are too violent and unpredictable. Those over there are the Scythian collective. They think humans lack sufficient cultural development. The Vryn are one of humanity's main supporters, but even they can't force the decision. Junho watched the display as aliens argued in languages he couldn't understand, translated into scrolling text at the bottom. Much of it was diplomatic language that said very little, but the core message was clear. Many species didn't want humans in the coalition. They're afraid of us, Junho realized. Some are, Hyejin agreed. Humans went from splitting atoms to reaching other star systems in less than 200 years. That's incredibly fast by galactic standards. Most species take thousands of years to reach that level. Rapid advancement makes you unpredictable, and unpredictable species are dangerous. Over the following days, Junho attended briefings and meetings. He met Vryn scholars who studied human culture and asked him endless questions. He met other humans who worked in various capacities for different alien species, mostly as translators, cultural advisors, or specialists in fields where humans had unique perspectives. One of these was a man named Daehan, a former soldier who now worked as a security contractor. He had the build of someone who spent serious time training, and the confidence of someone who had seen real combat. "You're the one the Empress claimed," Daehan said when they met in one of the palace's gardens. "It wasn't a question. That's me," Junho confirmed. Daehan studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Good, maybe you can actually help. Most humans out here are just trying to survive and send money home. But if the Empress herself has taken an interest, maybe we've got a chance. A chance at what? At not being the galaxy's favorite charity case." Daehan sat on a bench that had grown from the living ground. "Right now, humanity is tolerated. We're useful sometimes, interesting occasionally. But we're not respected. We're pets, curiosities. If we don't get full coalition membership, that's all we'll ever be." The words stung because they were true. Junho had felt it since arriving, the way aliens looked at humans. Like they were children. Like they were cute but ultimately unimportant. That evening, Empress Thala summoned him again. This time they met in what she called a meditation chamber. a spherical room with a transparent floor that showed the planet's surface far below. Standing in it felt like floating in space. "The coalition will vote in 30 days, Thala said without preamble. "I have been gathering support, but it's not enough. Too many species see humanity as a risk. They look at your history, your wars, your environmental damage, your violence against each other, and they see a species that hasn't learned control." "But we have learned," Junho protested. "We stopped destroying each other. We fixed our planet." I know," Thala interrupted gently. "But they don't. They see data and statistics. They don't see what I saw in your mind. They don't understand what makes humans special." "What makes us special?" Junho asked. "We're not the strongest. We're not the smartest. We're not even particularly good at anything compared to species that have been doing this for thousands of years." Thala moved closer. "You survive. Despite everything, despite all logic saying you should have destroyed yourselves, you survived. You adapted. You kept trying. That's what makes you special, Park Junho. Humans don't give up." She touched his forehead with one finger, and suddenly Junho's mind was filled with images. He saw human history from an outsider's perspective. The wars and the disasters, yes, but also the recoveries. The times humanity had been knocked down and gotten back up. The little choices millions of people made every day to help each other, save each other, lift each other up. It was overwhelming. Junho felt tears on his cheeks. "This is what I want the coalition to see," Thala said, removing her finger. "Not your violence, but your resilience. Not your mistakes, but your determination to fix them. But I cannot show them. They would dismiss it as Vryn manipulation. The message must come from a human. From you." "I can't speak to the coalition," Junho said. "I'm not a leader." "I'm not. You're human," Thala said firmly. "That's enough. But you need to understand what you're defending. You need to know your own species' worth." She gestured to the transparent floor beneath them. "I'm going to teach you to shield your mind from telepathic intrusion. It's a skill all diplomats need. And while I teach you, you're going to teach me about humanity, not the sanitized version your diplomats present. The real truth." "Can you do that?" Junho looked down at the planet spinning below. He thought about the cargo ships where he'd spent years, about the other workers who had become his friends, about Earth and everyone still there waiting to hear if they would be welcomed or rejected by the galaxy. "Yes," he said. "I can do that," and so they began. Every day for weeks, Junho and Thala met. She taught him meditation techniques that helped him build mental barriers. It was exhausting work that left him with headaches that lasted hours. But slowly, he learned to keep his surface thoughts private, to control what a telepath could sense from him. In exchange, he told her about humanity. Not the great achievements or the famous leaders, but the small truths. How humans helped strangers without expecting reward. How they told jokes in terrible situations. How they made art about pain because it helped them process it. How they formed bonds with animals that couldn't even speak. How they kept photos of dead loved ones not to worship them, but to remember to keep living for them. Thala listened to everything. Sometimes she asked questions. Sometimes she just observed him with those starry eyes. "You're afraid you'll fail," she said one day. "Of course I am," Junho admitted. "If I mess this up, I'm not just failing myself. I'm failing billions of people. And yet you continue trying. What else can I do?" Thala smiled, the first time Junho had seen her do so. It transformed her face from alien and distant to something almost warm. "Exactly," she said. "What else can you do but try? That's the human answer to every problem. I'm beginning to understand why my ancestors found your species so fascinating." 2 days before the coalition vote, news arrived that changed everything. The Kresh Dominion had formally challenged humanity's petition. And they had demanded a tribunal, a formal debate where both sides would present their cases before the entire assembly. Hyejin burst into Junho's room with the news. "They're going to tear humanity apart in front of everyone. The Kresh are master debaters. They've done this before to other species. It's going to be brutal." But when Junho told the Empress, she didn't seem concerned. If anything, she looked satisfied. "Good," Thala said. "Let them challenge us. Let them present their worst arguments. Because now we have the chance to respond, and you, Park Junho, are going to be the one who does it." Junho's stomach dropped. "Me? You," Thala confirmed. "The Kresh want to argue that humans are too violent, too chaotic, too dangerous. So we're going to show them a human, not a trained diplomat who knows what they're supposed to say. A real person who can speak from the heart about what humanity actually is. Are you ready? Junho wanted to say no, wanted to refuse, wanted to run back to his old life fixing engines where nobody expected him to save the world. But he thought about that hope Thala had seen in him, about everyone back home waiting, about the chance to prove that humanity belonged among the stars. I'm ready, he lied, but maybe if he kept saying it, it would become true. The Coalition Assembly Station was called Unity, which Junho thought was a nice name for a place where everyone seemed to argue constantly. The station was enormous, big enough to hold a small moon inside it. Different sections had different atmospheres and gravities to accommodate the vast variety of species that made up the coalition. Junho traveled there on the Empress's flagship along with a full diplomatic delegation. Heejin helped him prepare during the journey, running him through possible questions and arguments he might face. Dihan taught him breathing techniques to stay calm under pressure. The Kresh will try to make you angry, Dihan explained during one of their practice sessions. They'll bring up every terrible thing humanity has ever done. The wars, the genocides, the environmental destruction. They want you to get defensive or aggressive. Don't give them that. How do I not get angry when someone's attacking my entire species? Junho asked. Remember that they're not attacking your species. They're attacking their fear of your species. Big difference. Dahan demonstrated a boxer's stance. In a fight, you don't watch your opponent's fists. You watch their feet and their center of gravity. Same principle here. Watch what they're really afraid of, not what they're saying. The day of the tribunal arrived too quickly. Junho dressed in formal human clothing, a simple but well-made suit that Hyejin said would project humility and seriousness. The Empress wore her most impressive robes, the ones that seemed to contain entire galaxies. The assembly chamber was terrifying. Hundreds of aliens filled the seats in a massive circle. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness. The floor was transparent, showing the stars beneath. Junho felt like he was standing on nothing. The Kresh representative entered from the opposite side. War Prince Thorn was exactly what Junho had expected. Massive, covered in red-black armor that looked like it had been carved from volcanic rock, with 4 arms and a head that combined the worst features of a wolf and a shark. Each of Thorn's footsteps shook the floor slightly. A neutral moderator, some species Junho didn't recognize that looked like a floating collection of crystals, began the proceedings. The Kresh Dominion has challenged the human petition for coalition membership. Both sides will present their arguments. The assembly will then vote. War Prince Thorn, you may begin. Thorn's voice was like grinding rocks. The translation came through perfectly clear. The humans call themselves civilized. Let us examine this claim. 3 centuries ago, they nearly destroyed their homeworld through industrial pollution and resource depletion. 2 centuries ago, they fought wars that killed hundreds of millions using weapons of mass destruction. Even today, violence and inequality persist in their culture. This is a species that cannot control itself. Hollow projections appeared in the air, images of human wars, destroyed cities, polluted landscapes. They were all real, all true, all horrible. The humans claim they have changed, Thorn continued. But meaningful change requires time. Most species take thousands of years to evolve culturally. The humans ask us to believe they transformed themselves in mere generations. This is not growth. This is a temporary pause in their natural cycle of violence. Give them power, give them access to galactic technology, and they will inevitably return to their destructive patterns. The risk is too great. More images appeared. Crime statistics, political conflicts, economic disparities. Every ugly truth about humanity laid bare before hundreds of alien eyes. Junho felt sick. It was all true. He couldn't deny any of it. Thorn finished his presentation with a simple statement. The Kresh Dominion votes to reject the human petition. We cannot gamble the stability of the coalition on a species that has proven itself unsafe. The assembly erupted in discussion. Some aliens were nodding. Others were arguing. The floating moderator had to call for silence 3 times before the chamber quieted. The floor recognizes Empress Thala of the Vryn Empire. Thala stood, and the entire chamber fell silent. Her presence was that powerful. But she didn't speak herself. Instead, she gestured toward Junho. I yield my speaking time to Park Junho, representative of humanity. Junho's legs almost didn't work. He had to focus hard just to walk to the center platform without stumbling. Once there, he looked up at the hundreds of aliens staring down at him. Every eye in the chamber was on him. The weight of it was crushing. He thought about running, about admitting defeat, about all the ways this could go wrong. Then he thought about that hope Thala had seen in him, about the stubborn refusal to give up that apparently defined his species. He spoke. His voice sounded small in the huge chamber at first, but the amplification systems picked it up and carried it to everyone. War Prince Thorn is right, Junho began. That got everyone's attention. Even Thorn looked surprised. Everything he showed you is true. We did nearly destroy our world. We did fight terrible wars. We did hurt each other in ways that shame us. I'm not going to stand here and deny it or make excuses for it. Junho took a breath. But I'm also not going to pretend those things define us. He walked slowly as he spoke, looking at different sections of the assembly. Every species in this chamber has a dark past. The Kresh themselves were once warring clans who fought for dominance. The Vryn went through a period of isolation, where they almost lost themselves. The Sethian collective was fractured into competing factions for centuries. I've been studying your histories. None of you were peaceful and perfect from the beginning. Murmurs ran through the chamber. Some aliens looked offended. Others looked thoughtful. The difference is that you had thousands of years to forget your worst moments, to bury them in the past where they're just history, not living memory. Humans don't have that luxury. Our grandparents remember wars. Our parents remember pollution. We remember because we're young. And yes, that makes us messy and imperfect and sometimes difficult. Junho stopped in the center of the platform. But it also means we remember why we changed. We didn't transform because someone conquered us or because we were forced to. We changed because we chose to. Because we looked at what we were doing and said this is wrong and we stopped. How many species can say that? How many of you changed yourselves instead of being changed by circumstances? He could see War Prince Thorn shifting, preparing to respond. But Junho wasn't finished. You want to know if humans are safe? If we'll suddenly become violent again? I can't promise we won't. I can't stand here and guarantee that humanity will never make another mistake. But I can tell you this. We're the only species I know of that turned around while we were destroying ourselves. We were on the edge of collapse and we stepped back. That takes something that maybe only humans have. The ability to change direction even when momentum is carrying us toward disaster. Junho's voice grew stronger. You call us unpredictable. I call us adaptable. You call us violent. I call us survivors. You call us young and inexperienced. I call us brave enough to keep trying despite being the newest species in a galaxy full of civilizations, millions of years older than us. And yes, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to stumble and fall and embarrass ourselves. But we're also going to get back up. Because that's what humans do. We don't give up. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the usual background noise of translation systems seemed muted. I'm not asking you to trust humanity based on potential or promises, Junho said quietly. I'm asking you to trust us based on what we've already done. We survived ourselves. We fixed our world. We reached for the stars even though we knew we were the smallest and youngest species out here. We kept trying even when logic said we should quit. That's who we are. And if you reject us today, we'll just try again tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. Because giving up isn't in our nature. Junho looked directly at War Prince Thorn. You're right to be cautious. You're right that we're a risk. But every new species is a risk. Every change is a risk. The question isn't whether humans are perfect, we're not. The question is whether our strengths outweigh our weaknesses. Whether what we bring to the coalition is worth the risk of letting us join. He turned slowly, addressing the entire assembly. I think we're worth it. I think humanity has earned the chance to prove ourselves. Not because we're special or superior, but because we're human, and humans don't quit. Junho walked back to where Thala stood. His legs were shaking. His hands were trembling. But he'd said what he needed to say. The assembly erupted into discussion again, louder this time. Arguments broke out in a dozen different sections. The moderator was calling for order but being largely ignored. Then War Prince Thorn stood. The chamber fell silent immediately. The Kresh commanded that kind of respect. The human speaks well, Thorn said. His grinding rock voice was thoughtful. But words are easy. The Kresh value action over speech. I invoke the right of trial. The entire assembly gasped. Funyo looked at Hyejin, who had gone pale. What's the right of trial? He whispered. Hyejin's voice shook when she answered. It's an ancient tradition. If someone challenges a petition, they can demand a physical contest, single combat. If you fight and lose, humanity's petition is denied for a full generation. If you refuse to fight, humanity is branded as cowards and the petition is denied permanently. Junho felt his stomach drop through the floor. I have to fight him? That thing? War Prince Thorn crossed all four arms. I challenged Junho had 48 hours to prepare. It wasn't enough time. It would never be enough time. The combat sphere was an ancient structure that predated the coalition itself. It was a perfect sphere 200 meters in diameter, with a floor that could change its surface texture and composition based on what the combatants needed. Junho had been told it was designed to be fair to all species types, which probably meant it would be fair to Thorn and absolutely terrible for him. Daehan took charge of his training immediately. 2 days isn't enough to teach you how to fight, Daehan said bluntly, so we're not going to try. Instead, I'm going to teach you how not to die quickly. They spent hours practicing footwork, dodging, and how to fall without breaking bones. Daehan was brutal in his honesty. You're going to get hit. Multiple times hard. The question is whether you can stay conscious and mobile after it happens. Heejin researched Kresh physiology and fighting styles. They're incredibly strong and fast, but they're not invincible, she reported. Their joints are weak points. Their armor is thickest on their chest and back, thinnest at the neck and joints, and they're used to opponents who fight back with equal strength. They're not used to opponents who just endure. Endurance, Junho repeated. That's my strategy? Just get beaten up and hope I don't die? No, Empress Thala said. She had been watching the training silently. Your strategy is to be human. She had everyone else leave the training room. When they were alone, she approached Junho. War Prince Thorn expects you to try to fight like a warrior, to match his strength, to counter his technique. You cannot do those things. I know, Junho said bitterly, but you can do something he cannot. Thala placed a hand on Junho's chest, over his heart. Humans are endurance hunters. It's in your evolutionary history. Your ancestors hunted prey not by being faster or stronger, but by simply never stopping. You chased animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. That's your advantage, not strength, but persistence. Not power, but refusal to quit. He's not going to collapse from exhaustion, Junho pointed out. No, Thala agreed, but he will be confused, frustrated, thrown off balance by an opponent who doesn't behave as expected. Use that, don't try to beat him. Try to outlast him. Try to make him uncertain. Try to be so stubbornly, impossibly human that he doesn't know how to respond. It wasn't much of a strategy, but it was the only one Junho had. The night before the combat, Junho couldn't sleep. He sat in his quarters looking out at the stars, thinking about how he'd ended up here. Just weeks ago, he'd been fixing cooling systems on cargo ships. Now he was about to fight an alien warrior in single combat with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. It would be funny if it wasn't terrifying. Someone knocked on his door. The real kind of knock. Not the musical chime the Vrin used. Daehan entered without waiting for permission. Can't sleep either, the older man asked. Would you? Junho replied. Daehan sat down in the other chair. I've fought in 3 wars and more skirmishes than I can count. Never got used to the night before. Fear is good, though. Keeps you sharp. I'm not a fighter, Junho said. I'm going to lose. Probably, Daehan agreed. But that's not the point anymore. The point is what happens when you lose. Whether you go down begging or fighting, whether you quit or keep trying even when it's hopeless. He leaned forward. I've watched the Kresh fight before. They respect strength, sure, but they respect determination more. Win or lose, show them what humans are made of. The day of the combat arrived. Junho dressed in simple, flexible clothing that Daehan had selected. Nothing that would restrict movement or get in the way. No armor, no weapons, just him. The combat sphere was packed with observers. It seemed like every diplomat and representative in the station had come to watch. Junho walked out onto the floor and the noise was overwhelming. Cheers, jeers, commentary in hundreds of languages. War Prince Thorn entered from the opposite side. He'd removed most of his decorative armor, but still wore enough protection to stop most attacks. All 4 of his arms ended in claws that looked like they could tear through metal. His eyes, 6 of them arranged in 2 rows, all focused on Junho. The neutral moderator's voice echoed through the sphere. This is a trial by combat to determine the worthiness of humanity's petition for coalition membership. The contest will continue until one combatant yields or is unable to continue. Lethal force is permitted but discouraged. Combatants acknowledge the rules. Acknowledged, Thorn growled. Acknowledged, Junho said, his voice cracking slightly. Begin. Thorn didn't rush forward immediately. He circled slowly, studying Junho with all 6 eyes. Looking for weaknesses. Planning his attack. Junho stayed in the center, knees slightly bent, hands up in the defensive stance Dihan had drilled into him. His heart was hammering so hard he could barely hear anything else. Then Thorn moved. For something so large, he was impossibly fast. One moment he was 10 meters away. The next he was right there, swinging with 2 of his 4 arms. Junho tried to dodge but wasn't quite fast enough. The blow caught him in the ribs and sent him flying across the sphere. He hit the floor hard, all the air knocked out of his lungs. Pain exploded through his side. The crowd made various noises. Some sounded approving. Some sounded disappointed that it was over so quickly. But Junho pushed himself to his feet. It hurt, everything hurt. But he stood up. Thorn seemed surprised. Most opponents stay down after the first strike. Not human opponents. Junho gasped out. The fight continued. It wasn't really a fight, it was more like a beating with brief pauses. Thorn would strike. Junho would try to dodge or block, and usually he'd fail. He got hit in the shoulder, the leg, the back, the face. Each time he went down. Each time he got back up. After the 5th knockdown, some of the crowd started murmuring. After the 10th, the murmurs grew louder. By the 15th time, Junho struggled to his feet with blood running from his nose and lips. Even Thorn seemed confused. "Why do you keep standing?" Thorn demanded. "You cannot win." "This is pointless." Junho spat blood and managed a painful smile. "Maybe, but giving up is more pointless." Something shifted in the crowd then. The mocking sounds stopped. Even species that had argued against humanity's petition were watching with something like respect. Junho's vision was blurry. His ears were ringing. His whole body felt like one giant bruise. But he kept moving, kept trying, kept standing up every single time he got knocked down. And something strange started happening. Bunyo began to laugh. Not from madness, from the sheer absurdity of it all. Here he was, an engineer who fixed cooling systems, fighting a warrior prince in front of the galaxy. It was ridiculous. It was impossible. It was so completely, stubbornly, insanely human. The laughter seemed to unnerve Thorn more than anything else Junho had done. "You mock me?" "No," Junho said, still grinning despite his broken lips. "I'm laughing at the universe. It thinks it can make me quit." "It's wrong." He charged forward then, not with any real technique, just pure determination. Thorn batted him aside easily, but Junho rolled and came back again and again. And again, he wasn't landing hits. He wasn't even really defending himself anymore. But he wasn't stopping either. Every time Thorn knocked him down, Junho got back up. Slower each time, more painfully each time. But every single time, the crowd had gone almost silent. This wasn't what anyone had expected to see. Thorn hit him again, harder this time. Junho went down and didn't move for several seconds. 10 seconds, 20. The moderator was starting to move forward to check if he was unconscious. Then Junho's hand moved. Then his arm. Then with a sound that was half groan and half laugh, he pushed himself up one more time. Blood dripped from his face onto the floor. His legs shook like they might give out any moment. But he was standing. "Enough," Thorn said. Junho blinked through swollen eyes. "What?" "I said enough." War Prince Thorn lowered all 4 of his arms. "I yield." The sphere erupted into chaos. Voices shouting in hundreds of languages. The moderator trying to call for order. Junho just stood there swaying, not understanding what just happened. Thorn approached him slowly. "I have fought warriors from 100 worlds. I have never fought an opponent who refused to acknowledge defeat. You did not beat me with strength or skill. You beat me with something I have no defense against. You simply would not stop. That is worthy of respect." The War Prince turned to address the entire assembly, his voice carrying even over the noise. "I withdraw the Kresh Dominion's objection to humanity's petition. This species will either save the galaxy or doom it, but they have earned the right to try. Any species this stubborn, this unwilling to quit, deserves to be heard." Junho's legs finally gave out. He collapsed, but strong hands caught him before he hit the ground. Empress Thala had moved faster than seemed possible. She held him gently, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked almost human in her concern. "You did well, Park Junho," she said quietly. "You showed them exactly what I saw in you." "Did we win?" Junho mumbled. "Everything was getting dark around the edges. We won," Thala confirmed. Junho smiled and let the darkness take him. He'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, he'd done it. Later, much later, he would learn that the hologram of him standing up for the 60 Junho woke up in a medical facility that looked nothing like the hospitals he remembered from Earth. The walls glowed with soft light, and machines he didn't understand floated around his bed, occasionally beeping or humming. His body ached, but it was a distant ache, muted by whatever medicine they'd given him. Hyejin was sitting in a chair nearby, reading from a tablet. When she noticed he was awake, she smiled. "Welcome back. You've been unconscious for 2 days. 2 days?" Yunho tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his ribs. "Don't move. You have 3 cracked ribs, a fractured collarbone, severe bruising, and a concussion. The doctors say you'll be fine, but you need to rest." Hyejin set down her tablet. "You're famous, by the way. Everyone in the galaxy has seen the fight. They're calling you the human who wouldn't stay down." Junho closed his eyes. "Did it work? Is humanity getting accepted? The vote is in 3 days." The Creche withdrew their objection, which is huge. But there's still debate. Some species are arguing that your performance proves humans are too reckless and should be protected from themselves. Hyejin's voice turned bitter. Typical coalition politics. Even when you win, someone finds a way to make it complicated. Over the next 2 days, Junho recovered slowly. Dihan visited and looked genuinely impressed. "You fought like someone who had no idea what he was doing, but absolute certainty that he wouldn't quit." It was beautiful in a terrifying way. Empress Thala visited multiple times. During her 3rd visit, she sat beside his bed and looked troubled. "Something's wrong," Junho said. It wasn't a question. He was getting better at reading Vrin expressions. "I've been gathering information since your trial," Thala said carefully. "There are patterns in the Coalition's behavior that disturb me. Humanity is not the first species to face unusual obstacles during their membership application. Over the past 5 centuries, dozens of emerging species have been delayed, redirected, or rejected for reasons that seemed valid at the time, but appear suspicious when examined together." "What do you mean?" "I mean that someone is manipulating the process, deliberately keeping new species from gaining full membership and influence." Thala's starry eyes met his. "Someone in the Coalition doesn't want the balance of power to change." Junho felt cold despite the warm room. "You're saying there's a conspiracy?" "I am saying there are anomalies that require investigation." Thala stood and paced. "Your trial should have ended the debate. Instead, new objections keep appearing. Technical concerns about Earth's infrastructure, questions about your governmental stability, demands for additional cultural assessments. None of these issues were mentioned before, but suddenly they're critical. Can you find out who's behind it?" "I'm trying. But whoever is doing this has been careful. They work through legitimate channels, hide behind valid concerns, and leave no obvious trail." Thala stopped pacing. "I need your help." "My help? I can barely walk. I need you to do what humans do best. Refuse to accept the obvious answer." Thala touched his forehead again, and suddenly his mind was filled with information. Data about dozens of species applications, voting records, trade agreements, diplomatic communications. It was overwhelming. "There's a pattern here, but I cannot see it. My mind is trained to think in Vrin ways. I need a human perspective. Find what I'm missing." The information faded but left an impression like he'd read a book and could remember the important parts. Hunyo closed his eyes and thought. Who benefits from keeping new species out? Who loses if the coalition expands? "The middle tier," he said suddenly. "It's not the powerful species who are blocking new members. It's the ones in the middle. They're afraid of being pushed down if new species start rising." Thala's eyes widened slightly, a big reaction for a Vrin. "Explain." "The most powerful species like the Vrin have nothing to fear from new members. You're too established. But species in the middle, the ones who have some influence but not a lot, they could be displaced if new civilizations start joining and advancing. They're protecting their position by making sure nobody new can challenge them." Thala was silent for a long moment. "That would explain why the objections are always valid but excessive. They're not falsifying evidence, they're simply emphasizing problems until they seem insurmountable." She began pacing again. "If you're correct, this is a scandal that could fracture the coalition. But I need proof." Hyejin was recruited to help. Over the following days, while Junho continued recovering, she dug through decades of coalition records. Dahan called in favors from other humans working in various alien organizations, gathering gossip and rumors. And Empress Thala used her position to access classified files. The pieces began coming together. A pattern emerged of mid-tier species who consistently voted against new membership applications, trade deals that rewarded these species for their votes, diplomatic pressure applied to smaller civilizations who tried to sponsor emerging species. It was all technically legal. That was the genius of it. Nothing they'd done violated coalition law. But the cumulative effect was clear. They'd turned the membership process into an insurmountable obstacle course. On the day before the vote on humanity's application, Unyo was finally released from medical care. He was still sore and moved stiffly, but he could walk without help. Thala summoned him to her private chambers on the station. "I have enough evidence to bring charges," she said, "but if I do this publicly, it will cause chaos. The accused species will deny everything. Their allies will defend them. The coalition could split into factions. Wars have started over less. But if you don't do it publicly, they'll keep doing this," Junho pointed out. "How many species have been kept down because of this conspiracy? How many civilizations were denied their chance?" Thala nodded. "That is the dilemma. Justice or stability, truth or peace." Junho thought about his fight with War Prince Thorn, about standing up even when it was hopeless, about the stubborn human refusal to accept things as they were when they should be better. "You know what my answer is," he said. "I do." Thala looked out at the stars, "Which is why I already submitted the evidence to the Assembly. The vote tomorrow will not just be about humanity's membership. It will be about the coalition's integrity. You've forced my hand, Park Junho. You've made me believe that the right thing is worth the risk." The next morning, the Assembly was in chaos before the session even started. The evidence of manipulation had spread through the diplomatic community overnight. Accusations flew. Denials were issued. Several species demanded investigations. Others demanded the evidence be ignored as politically motivated. Junho sat in the human observation section with Hyejin and Dahan, watching it all unfold. He felt strangely calm. Either this would work or it wouldn't, but at least the truth was out now. The session finally began. The neutral moderator struggled to maintain order. Representatives from over a dozen mid-tier species stood to defend themselves, arguing that their actions were within their rights, that they'd done nothing technically illegal, that this was an attack on their sovereignty. They weren't wrong. Everything they'd done was legal, just unethical. Then something unexpected happened. A representative from a small species called the Nathari stood up. The Nathari looked like crystalline birds and had little political influence. Nobody paid much attention when they spoke. 70 years ago, the Nathari representative said in a voice like chimes, "My species applied for coalition membership. We were told we weren't ready, that our technology was insufficient, that our culture needed development. We accepted this judgment. We worked for decades to meet every requirement. And when we applied again, we were given new requirements, and then new ones again. We have been in probationary status for 3 generations." Other representatives began murmuring. Several small species were standing now, recognition dawning on their faces. "The Nethari are not alone," another small species called out. "The Ryloth have been waiting for 40 years. The Kes for 60. We thought we were simply not worthy, but perhaps we were just not convenient." What happened next would be discussed by political scholars for years. One by one, representatives from smaller and newer species stood up. They shared their stories of delayed applications, moving goalposts and endless requirements. The accusations against the mid-tier species became impossible to ignore, as dozens of civilizations testified to similar experiences. The mid-tier species tried to defend themselves, but the weight of evidence was overwhelming. They hadn't needed to falsify anything, because the truth of their manipulation was written across decades of policy decisions. The moderator called for emergency recess. The assembly dissolved into heated discussion, and Junho realized something important. This had stopped being about humanity's application. This had become about the coalition's soul. The emergency recess lasted for 6 hours. During that time, the assembly broke into informal groups arguing and debating. Junho watched from the observation area, as old alliances fractured and new ones formed. Species that hadn't spoken in years were suddenly deep in conversation. Others were shouting at each other in diplomatic language that barely hid their anger. Heejin brought him updates as she heard them. The Vrin are pushing for a complete review of the membership process. The Kresh are supporting them, which is huge. They never agree with the Vrin on anything. But the mid-tier species are pushing back hard. They're arguing that changing the rules now would invalidate decades of precedent. They're not wrong, Junho said. They're absolutely wrong, Daehan countered. Just because something has been done a certain way for a long time doesn't make it right. That's just institutional inertia pretending to be wisdom. When the assembly finally reconvened, the atmosphere had changed. The chaotic energy had been replaced by something more controlled but also more intense. This wasn't just another session. This was a moment that would define what the coalition stood for. The moderator spoke first. We will now proceed with the vote on humanity's petition for full coalition membership. However, several representatives have requested the opportunity to speak before the vote. The first speaker was from the Scythian Collective, one of the mid-tier species accused of manipulation. They gave a long speech about the importance of standards, of not lowering requirements just to be inclusive, of maintaining the coalition's integrity. It was technically well argued and completely missed the point. Then Empress Thala stood. The entire assembly fell silent immediately. I do not need to repeat the evidence that has been presented, she said. It speaks for itself. What I want to address is the question underneath all of this. What is the coalition for? Is it a club for established powers? A system for maintaining the status quo? Or is it what we claim it to be? A union of species working together for mutual benefit and growth? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. If we reject humanity today, we are answering that question. We are saying that the coalition exists to preserve existing hierarchies, not to welcome new voices. We are saying that we value stability over justice, convenience over truth, and we are telling every emerging species in the galaxy that the coalition is closed to them unless they're willing to navigate a deliberately impossible process. Thala's voice grew stronger. But if we accept humanity, and if we commit to reviewing our membership process to ensure it's fair, we are saying something different. We are saying the coalition is strong enough to change, that we believe in our own principles, that we are willing to grow even when growth is uncomfortable. She turned to look at Junho in the observation section. The humans showed us what their species values: persistence, hope, and the refusal to accept that the way things are is the way things must be. Perhaps it is time the coalition learned from their example. The speech ended. Thala sat down, and Junho realized that she'd shifted the entire conversation. This wasn't about humanity anymore. This was about what kind of coalition everyone wanted to be part of. But then something unexpected happened. One of the diplomats signaled for recognition. The moderator looked surprised but granted it. I wish to speak, Junho said. His voice was clear over the amplification system, but he felt his heart racing. The human observer has requested to speak, the moderator announced. This is unusual, but given the circumstances, I will allow it. Junho stood and walked down to the central platform. His ribs ached. His face was still bruised, but he stood straight and looked around at all the aliens watching him. I'm grateful for Empress Thala's support, he began, and I'm grateful to everyone who has spoken for humanity, but I need to say something that might surprise you. He took a breath. I'm withdrawing humanity's petition for membership. The assembly erupted. Humans in the observation section gasped. Even Thala looked shocked. The moderator called for silence, but it took several minutes to restore order. Let me explain, Junho continued once the noise died down. For weeks I've watched this process. I've seen the politics, the manipulation, the games, and I've realized something. Humanity doesn't want to join this coalition, not this version of it. He could see aliens shifting uncomfortably. Some looked offended, others looked curious. The coalition is supposed to be about cooperation and mutual benefit. But what I've seen is a system that protects the powerful and keeps out the new. That's not cooperation. That's just a pyramid with someone standing on top. Junho's voice grew stronger. So here's what humanity is going to do instead. We're going to wait. We're going to help fix the membership process first. And when it's actually fair, when it actually lives up to the coalition's stated values, then we'll apply again. And when we join, it will be as equals in a system that works, not as supplicants in a broken one. The silence that followed was absolute. Nobody had expected this. Nobody knew how to respond. You're debating whether we're worthy of joining you, Junho continued. But we're debating whether you're worthy of humanity. Fix your system. Make it fair. Honor your own principles, and then we can talk about membership." He looked around at all the different species. "I know this seems arrogant. I know we're the newest species here, the youngest, the least experienced. But sometimes you need an outsider's perspective to see what insiders have stopped noticing. Your coalition has problems, and adding us to a broken system won't help anyone." Junho turned to face Thala directly. "The Empress saw hope in me. She saw a species that refuses to accept the way things are when they should be better. Well, this is humanity being human. We're not accepting your broken system. We're going to help you fix it, even if it means staying on the outside until the work is done." He walked back to the observation section. His legs were shaking again, but he made it without falling. The assembly was still silent, processing what had just happened. Then War Prince Thorn stood. "The human speaks wisdom," he said in his grinding voice. "The Kresh Dominion supports a comprehensive review of coalition membership procedures. We have been complacent. We have allowed corruption to grow in the guise of tradition. It is time to cut out the rot." Other species began standing, some of the most powerful civilizations, the ones who had nothing to fear from reform, adding their support, but also some of the smaller species, the ones who had been waiting decades for acceptance. The mid-tier species who had benefited from the corrupt system tried to object, but their voices were drowned out by the growing tide of calls for reform. The moderator struggled to maintain order. "This session will recess while we consider these developments. A proposal for comprehensive reform of coalition membership procedures will be drafted for vote. The human petition is withdrawn pending system review." As the assembly broke up, Junho felt exhausted. Hijin grabbed his arm to steady him. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest. Possibly both." "Definitely both," Dahan agreed, but he was grinning. Empress Thala approached. She looked at Junho for a long moment, her starry eyes unreadable. Then she smiled, that transformative expression that made her seem almost warm. "You were correct," she said. "You are exactly what I saw in you. Stubborn, hopeful, and unwilling to accept less than what should be. You have changed the coalition today, Park Junho. Perhaps more than any diplomat or warrior could have." "Did I just ruin everything for humanity?" Hunyo asked quietly. "No," Thala said. "You saved us from joining a system that would have consumed us. Better to wait for real acceptance than to accept hollow membership." The following months were chaotic. The coalition formed committees to review membership procedures. Arguments broke out constantly, but slowly reforms began to take shape. Requirements were standardized. Review processes were made transparent. Appeal procedures were established. The mid-tier species who had manipulated the system tried to block the reforms, but they no longer had the political capital. Too many other species had become invested in change. Humanity was granted permanent observer status, not full membership but full diplomatic rights. Junho was appointed as humanity's first coalition observer, with Empress Thala as his official sponsor. It wasn't what they'd hoped for, but it was a foundation to build on. 6 months after the dramatic session, Junho stood in the assembly again. This time he was there to witness other species, the Nathari, the Reloth, the Kess, finally get their membership votes under the new fair process. One by one, civilizations that had been waiting decades were welcomed as full members. Thala stood beside him watching. "This is your doing," she said quietly. "You showed them that the system was broken. You gave them the courage to demand better." "I just refused to quit," Junho said. "Yes," Thala agreed. "Very human of you." That evening, Junho sent a message back to Earth. It was the first communication he'd been allowed to send since being selected by the Empress. He kept it simple. "We didn't get accepted yet, but we changed how acceptance works. The coalition asked if we were ready to join them. I told them they need to be ready for us. We're going to earn our place, and when we finally get it, it will be worth the wait."